Namaste. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, that which is day to the worldly man is night to the yogi, and that which is day to the yogi is night to the worldly man. And it gives us this difference of view that the worldly person has from a spiritual person. And when we say a worldly person, we don't just mean a person who is adept at higher level social interaction, but we mean somebody who believes that the world, as we live it through the brain and the senses, is all that there is. And the spiritual person, the yogi, is the person who begins to perceive life from the inside out, begins to perceive that which is not actually animated by the body, the physical body, but that which is ever present underneath the surface of all life, the universal reality of divine consciousness. So there's actually a description of the difference. It's said that we are born into this world, and that the spiritual person is twice born. In the West, it's you're born again. You're born to the spiritual life. You begin to perceive a whole new life, just the way that a baby begins to perceive a whole new outward life. There's a point at which we begin to perceive a whole new inward life. And so being twice born, this is the subject for today. And I'd like to invite Swami Kriyananda to share some thoughts with us on the subject.
Here also in balance, O flower of the twice born, those leaders in my own army who are outstanding. Now Duryodhana has spoken with great anxiety when he sees this great army opposed to his own army, and he's worried about what the consequences will be to him in this war. He addresses Dronacharya as O flower of the twice born. To be twice born is an interesting thing. Jesus said also that you must be born again. And many people think that it just means that you accept Jesus at the altar. It has another deeper meaning. To be twice born means you've been born of the flesh, but when you are truly baptized by the Spirit, by hearing the sound of Om, by having some divine contact so that God awakens you in spirit, this is a very important part of your growth toward God. You must be born not only of flesh and blood, but of the Spirit. I was twice born when I met my Guru. I remember my father was very upset with me and tried to take me away from the path, and I finally had to write to him, and I didn't like to do it, but I said, I don't want to say these things, but I must say them. Physical birth is something, and I'm grateful to you for that. But don't try to turn me against my Guru. Spiritual birth is everything. And if you try to take me away from him, I must choose. And how can I choose between somebody who gave me my physical birth in one life and he who has been my father for many incarnations? My Guru to me represents God, and God has forever been my father. So don't force me to, because if I do, there will be no choice. So from then on, he kept silent. But one doesn't like to disappoint one's parents. One doesn't like to disappoint one's family. And yet I have to tell you this, that if you want God, you will have to disappoint somebody. And the chances are it will be your mother, your father, your relatives. Because the world, you can't seek God with your feet in two boats. The currents will separate those boats and you'll fall in the middle and drown. You must make your choice in life. Do you want truth or do you want error? Most people would say, well, I don't want error, but I want to have a good time. They don't realize that that is the error. They think that they want to live a responsible life in this world, but responsible to whom? To a bunch of people who are all in error? There is only one truth, and that is God. Everything else is delusion. And how many lives do we wander in delusion? There is a statement in the Bhagavad Gita which says that with the day of Brahma, that is when God creates the whole universe again, I throw all these beings out again. And in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was a great master, a Sufi master in Islam. And he said that it was my guru interpreted it, explained it to me in this way, but that many of those who come into manifestation at the beginning of a day of Brahma are still wandering at the end of a day of Brahma. It takes 5 to 8 million lives to reach the human level. You have to come up from the atom. Master said that every atom is dowered with individuality. God is everywhere, and His center everywhere, circumference nowhere. You have to realize that everything is God, and everything therefore is conscious. But gradually that little germ of consciousness that is in the atom begins to expand. They say that before a galaxy is formed, or a sun is formed, that the magnetism, the gravitational pull of an atom is very small, and atoms may be within 17 miles of each other or more. And then sometimes they happen to come together, and that makes their gravity greater. And when more and more come together, their gravity gets greater and greater until finally it's so great that it sucks great clouds of atoms in from billions of miles away, and a great star is formed. The sun is 93 million miles from where we are right now. It's 8 minutes it takes the light to get here. And the gradual growth of consciousness through these coalescing forms comes up to the point where science begins to speak of living beings, but everything is living. It's just that a rock can't play chess with you. A rock can't answer your questions, but a rock knows that it's somehow there. J.C. Bose, the great Bengali scientist, proved that rocks respond to stimuli, and they can also respond to poison and completely die. So gradually you come up through the germs, through the worms, through the birds and animals and so on, until finally after 5 or 8 million lives you reach the human level. But it would be a wonderful thing to understand that everything is conscious. Most people, when they grow food, just think they're growing something inanimate until finally it becomes living. They should understand that there are life forces behind what they're growing. If they have reverence for the divine power in even the food that they grow, they will grow much more. Findhorn in Scotland, because of its connection with the devas in the lower astral beings in the astral world that take care of plants, they were able to grow huge plants and much more nourishing. I read some time ago that the life force in spinach today is about 1/10 what it was back in 1920 or so. These are vague figures. I'm not trying to be exact. The point is that we should put life into whatever we get life back from. We should respond to this world with gratitude. And this life force gradually evolves up to the human level. And from then on, as I said before, you can't fall from that level unless you're very naughty, let's say. But if you continue from the human level, you can reach God. Normally what you do is you go from the human level up to the astral level, and you become an astral being and an angel, and then to a causal being, and finally become liberated in God. But you can be liberated even from this level. The important thing is that you love God and not try to seek fulfillment in anything outside of Him. So to be twice born is to be born in the Spirit, to know that from now on you want God, to have some sort of response from God, to be bathed in Om, for example, the great cosmic vibration, to feel the bliss of God's presence in your heart. These things are the most important thing of life. And so he's addressing Dronacharya as, O flower of the twice born.
When we come into this world and interact with it under the circumstances of our culture to which we're born, we are given an impression from the environment in which we live about what life is and the way that it works. And we assume that that impression is correct. I mean, after all, if the majority of people are acting in a certain way, you sort of figure, well, they must be right, and you go along with it. But that reasoning is somewhat mistaken. Kriyanandaji used to say that, and I think he got this somewhere else, but I don't remember clearly. The majority, the minority has a possibility of being right. The majority has no possibility of being right. And in America, in the pioneering days of America, when after the East Coast had been settled and people were moving west, and the Great Plains, there was millions and millions of bison, and they were just everywhere. And but one of the ways that the American Indians would hunt the buffalo was to start a stampede and get it going in the direction of a cliff. And then basically the buffalo would run at each one following the one in front of it right off the cliff, and thousands would die until finally the momentum of the stampede was lessened, and some were the energy dissipated, and then some didn't go off the cliff. But thousands and thousands of buffalo were just run off the cliff this way. And isn't this the way nature works? Evolution causes things to go in a certain direction, and then it goes until there's a break or a shift, or what we call a mutation, an environmental change, and then a new direction is taken. And what we see in nature is that everything is in flux. Nature doesn't stop. Evolution doesn't stop. It continues. But it doesn't always continue in the direction of life. It can continue in the direction of the end of a species. And in recent years, we've seen greater and greater awareness of endangered species, and we're pretty arrogant as a humanity in thinking that we know what's going on and what's been going on. And the truth is, we know very little about what's been going on, and so when we look at endangered species, we don't, and especially if people have their political agenda, they don't tell you both sides of the story. It's true that there are many endangered species, but those people don't tell you that there is a balance in nature, and on average, there are new species being created just as rapidly as the other species are disappearing. And nature has its own way of keeping balance. And in nature, every species passes. It's just that simple. Even if the species goes for, 10 million years, it will eventually dissipate, and it will mutate at minimum, and at maximum it will be gone. Life on the outside is not permanent. And there is no guarantee of well-being. Nature is tough. The circle of life is brutal. If you've seen any of the National Geographic documentaries on, the lions and life on the savannah, it's brutal. But oh wait, humanity makes the lions look like kitty cats. We are the most brutal species on the planet. There's no species that kills its own kind more quickly, more easily, with more interest and ingenuity than humankind. I was reading a science fiction book not that long ago, and in this book they described, of course it was in the future, it was known that there are, in this book maybe there was 5 or 7 galactic species, or maybe, no, there was many more, I forget how many, but when the galactic community became aware of Earth people, we were classified as the galactic caste system as warriors. We were some of the toughest, meanest, baddest soldiers in the universe. And of course, there's a certain group of people on this planet who would take great pride in that. Say, wow, all right, humans, we're great. But to describe yourself as greatly ignorant isn't really a compliment. Thinking that physical domination is the definition of greatness, thinking that physical enjoyments and power and control, and that economic progress is the definition of progress. These are very limiting views about what our potential is in life. And this is a very important thing to understand, is that if you follow a belief system that teaches mediocrity, and you accept that as universal truth, you are following the buffalo off the cliff. You are saying, in spite of a greater reality, you're saying that I choose to not believe or to be uninterested in any greater possibility. Now, yogis, and of course religions, have established belief systems that explain and describe some greater potential. But unfortunately, those religions generally do not give you what we would describe as a scientific basis from which to evaluate the truth of their belief system. Those belief systems are basically designed to say, you're going to find out when you die, and you just have to take our word for it. But if you don't take our word for it, you're going to go to hell forever. And that is really like, there's certainly billions of people who basically accept that. But science tells us that you can actually study things. You can delve into them. You can understand them more deeply than you did before. We've seen incredible scientific progress in the last, 200 years, really. It's been unbelievable. Even it's only, 110 years we've gone from the horse and the buggy to space, going out into space. That's a huge leap. And then, of course, in all the many directions that we all know about. So that tells us that there's more that can be known. And yogis have given us a system for knowing life from a spiritual point of view. And it's essential that we realize that if we are not required to have blind belief, and in fact we shouldn't. And Kriyananda was making this point that if we want to be twice born, If we want to perceive a greater spiritual reality than just physical consciousness, we have to have an experience of that truth. It's not sufficient just to believe. Now, it's also true that when people begin to practice the spiritual life, they use a basic system, whatever their beliefs are, their techniques are. But it's true that those techniques don't work the same for every person. And that's because each and every person is coming at a different starting point. Just because you come to a level 1 class doesn't mean you're all equal in spiritual development at this time in this place. So because people's past experience, in combination with as what we would accept as their karma from previous incarnations, but they've come to that experience. But it will take just like if you were joining a class of dancers, they wouldn't all develop as good dancers at the same pace. And in fact, some would drop away and never become good dancers. And a very few would go on to higher and higher levels of dancing capability. It's the same in the spiritual life. You could say that we all have the equal potential as souls, but it's true that we don't all take advantage of that potential. And it's important for us to realize that the only one that is going to get us to God is us. We have to make that decision. Nobody else can make that decision for us. But there's help available. And that's an important thing, that we realize that if we want to perceive more than we have in the past, it makes sense that we shouldn't have to discover this only for ourselves, as if nobody had ever been there before. But we can get a guide. We can talk to somebody who's had experience. We can take advantage of those who've come before us. And we need to realize that it's our responsibility to choose the boat. Again, as Kriyananda pointed out, we have to choose the boat that we want to live in. You can't have a foot in two boats. You will fall in the water. Now, of course, sometimes when we fall in the water, we can then drag ourselves back up into the boat that's going where we really want to go. But sometimes people end up in the worldly boat again. And there is no guarantee of spiritual success until we achieve a level of spiritual perception that is an unbreakable level. This is described as Jivan Mukta, freed while living. That state where you've communed with God and you can't fall. And until you achieve that state, you're at risk for being attracted to things that will be distracting. God says that we can play in the creation for as long as we want. Billions of years, days and many days, I don't know. I sometimes wonder who the slowest soul to go through the creation. Did they go months of Brahma? Years of Brahma? I mean, I don't know. The slowest soul, you can only imagine. It'd be pretty slow. But I also wonder about who's the fastest. Maybe Babaji, but we don't know that. We have spiritual superheroes that inspire us. But the reality is that we must choose and commit ourselves, dedicate ourselves to the spiritual life if we want to achieve the maximum spiritual success. And of course, this is, as we say, I'm preaching to the choir. You're here. You're doing something. And but we have to be reminded. And we have to look at our lives, how did I live today? How am I doing? What am I doing? And recognize that we can always do more. Now there is a very powerful help that we can have. Of course, the Guru, which we often talk about, but also environment. Master said environment is stronger than will. Now that's not always true. If you go to a bar with some people, you don't have to drink. People do that. So it doesn't mean automatically if you go in a bar you're going to drink alcohol. But it's more likely that you will. And if you go to a bar enough times, eventually you probably will. You would be very unusual if you didn't. And so when we think about our lives, if we live a worldly life, we're living in an environment that we perceive as being outward oriented. If we live in a spiritual environment, we're talking about an environment that supports inner spiritual perception. And of course, this is really why we have been developing our plan for spiritual community and to create a stronger and stronger environment to support each other spiritually. But it's important to recognize that the most powerful spiritual environment is that which we live in inside ourselves, in harmony with the teachings, the path, the spiritual path that we've been drawn to, and the Guru's inner presence and guidance. And this inner relationship, when you make it strong through your spiritual practices, no matter how easy or difficult those practices may be, if you practice them, you create an inner awareness, and you will have an experience, as Kriyananda described, of a inner experience of universal consciousness. God doesn't need to be called God. This is really a sticky point for many people, is that they grow up with what everybody else has been saying. Oh, here's what God's name is. Here's what God looks like. And you have to believe my view of that description. But in the Bible it says, "Be still and know that I am God." It doesn't say, find a picture of me, look at a burning bush, as Moses is said to have seen. It's be still. Be still. In that stillness, we begin to perceive things that are going on inside of us. This is part of the yoga science. When we learn to perceive the spiritual light, when we learn to perceive the cosmic sound of Om, when we begin to feel in that stillness deeper and deeper perceptions of universal truth, bliss, joy, love, the wisdom of God, these universal realities. And if we, like insects, who have a very limited ability to perceive the world around, if you're a fly in India, you know nothing about flies in America. You just don't know anything about them. You don't have the capability of perception. We can, in India here, we can read about the flies of America and find out, yeah, they have flies too over there. And we have a much broader knowledge about things going on the planet. We certainly don't know everything that's going on here. We don't even know what's going on inside of our own bodies, our own minds. We have no idea the totality of what's going on in there. But as yogis, we become inward trekkers. We go trekking inside and begin to perceive on deeper and deeper levels what we call the mountain of spiritual aspiration. We seek to rise up and see that great vision, to see what you can see at the top of the mountain. And when you perceive that inside, it's the most real experience that you'll ever have. And everybody here has touched it. But what we want to do is not just touch it with the toe, like you might when you go to a lake or a pool or an ocean, but you want to begin swimming in it. And then eventually, I am the bubble, make me the sea. When you go out on the water and you float in the water, you're still separate from the water. We want to dissolve our individualized consciousness into universal ocean consciousness. And this is the only true way to know truth. This is the essential pathway to the truth of all of life. But if we're interested, and you have to be adventurous, because all of the rest of the world, most of it's going off the cliff with the rest of the buffalo. The cliff of endless ups and downs. The cliff of life, death, rebirth. Life, death, rebirth. And now I'm an accountant, and now I'm an engineer, and now I'm poor, and now I'm rich, and now I'm famous, and now I'm a nobody, and now I'm a slave, and now I'm healthy, and now I'm sick, and all of the variations of human experience. And it goes on and on and on until we choose to explore this potential. If we truly want to be twice born, we can't just say, okay, I believe that this is true. We must act on that belief. You must not give up until you've experienced that God presence. And once you've experienced some of it, you've got to go for more and more and more of it. It is the pathway to happiness. And this is something that we have to fight against the world's magnetic, habitual, forward action towards limitation. The world is designed to keep us small. We want to become infinite. We've got to dedicate ourselves to it. And in order to do that, we need to bind together and to increase our group dedication to helping ourselves and to help each other. This is really the lifesaver. The lifesaver is the Sangha. And while, in the highest sense we say the Guru is the savior, but it's as a practical matter, our ability to tune into and stay connected to the Guru is tied to the support system, the environment in which we live. We say environment is stronger than will, but Master also said that you can overcome any environment through dynamic control of will and life force. So we, again, even in the Sangha, not everyone will become free in this lifetime. I mean, that's just an unfortunate fact. But the progress that you can make, yes, it's a terrible, thing. But what choice do we have? We don't know what we can accomplish. Let us seek to accomplish as much as we can. And know that, as Krishna says, no effort is wasted. So every effort that we make leads to greater spiritual opportunities in the future. But if we give up, if we say, well, if there's no guarantee that I'm going to go all the way, I might as well, have fun. As if limiting our consciousness was fun. But to the worldly person, the limited consciousness is all they know. They don't really know the fun of spirit, the joy of spirit. They don't really realize how much greater their potential is. And we need to, having touched it, we need to immerse ourselves deeper and deeper into it. And this is essentially what we do on the spiritual path. So remember, it's not enough just to be inspired and say, okay, now I'm twice born. I've found my spiritual life. I've found my guru. I've been touched to some degree. But then we have to live in the consciousness of life being a spiritual journey and not a physical journey. We have to live every day in the consciousness that this is a spiritual experience. God is present. And that the goal of my life is to become more aware of that truth and to live in a way that leads me to that inward growth, that greater ability to perceive its truth. This is the path of self-realization. To know in body, mind, and soul that we are now in possession of the kingdom of God. That we are spirit. This is our truth. Namaste.